Welcome to Revlog, where Aaron is back in the saddle this week.
Here we go.
And Bryan has promised to be nice to him. So we're looking forward to that.
Hello, Aaron.
Bryan, I will
Welcome.
say, you are the one constant
Namaste.
in Revlog.
You are the one. Yeah,
I'm
that's right.
grateful for your constancy.
They can't get rid of me.
Yeah, well, there's that too. There's an online petition, but
We've ignored it. Yeah.
mostly.
All right. Well, let's get to the text. Maybe the most famous text
Yeah.
from David's life. This week we're 2 Samuel 11, David and Bathsheba episode. Bryan, why don't you kick us off? What were your initial thoughts on 2 Samuel 11?
This is an abuse of power. I see that's what I see in this. I mean, David, I don't think David was in a dangerous place necessarily because he was idle and had time on his hands. I think he was in a dangerous place because he was looking at power in that moment as an end in itself. I think that, I've heard much, in growing up, that David was in a moment of temptation and, he should have fled. But, I mean, if you play that out to its logical end, David was at home when kings normally were at war. So the antidote to temptation is to go off to war. I think that that's a little bit misguided. I think that David had already decided, I'm just going to be in power. Yeah. And I'm going to do what I want. And I think he had already, he said, I'm not going to deny myself any trappings of power.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. Yeah,
I think to that end, when you look at this whole chapter, the only time the Lord's name is mentioned is the end to say,
that's right.
This was displeasing. This was wicked in God's sight. When these previous chapters that we've been reading, we see
that's good.
David received God's help, or David sought after the Lord, and this is one of those where he was, what about me?
That's exactly. It's almost like a bubble of self-contained, just narcissism there, and then it's back to reality, as you say at the end. That's right. The thing David had done displeased the Lord.
Well, what struck me as far as observation goes is I was so hurt by how quickly we can deceive ourselves to cover up what we've done, and to what extent it goes. This is a man who, for his entire kingship, and even prior to his kingship, when his anointing, that sought desperately God's will, and when he makes this very this awful sin, he quickly just goes all in to cover it up, and to the point that he would murder.
Well, and this is what, when you seek after power, when you live in power as an end in itself, this is what it does. Power seeks to conform reality to your own desire. Yeah. So he didn't want to be guilty of adultery, so he made her husband dead, as if that were going to change it. But this is bending reality to himself, or attempting to.
Well, and what's disconcerting to me is someone that you would put on a pedestal of righteousness, and yet we fall off that slope so quickly. And if that could happen to someone like David, we are all, we should be cautious about
how the mighty have fallen.
Yeah, it's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's turn our attention to questions of the text. Bryan, let's start with you. What's a question that arose out of this text?
I'm going to continue in that same vein. What is power for? If it's not an end in itself, what is it for? And I think that I remember Jesus telling the story of the talents. He gives people certain things, talents or possessions or power or whatever it may be. And it is not an end in itself. It's not something to be hoarded and kept and buried or just lusted after or looked at. It's meant to be used. And then following on to that, I mean, we all have certain things that we've been given. How do I address then the powerless among us? I mean, David was dealing with powerless people in relation to himself, Bathsheba, Uriah. And what did he do? I mean, how did he address the powerlessness of people around him? May it may it never be that we fail to ask that question seriously.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point for our stewardship in stewardship of our resources, even any authority that we might have, using it for the stewardship of God, and like you said, to help those who are powerless. Or
It's
have
an
less power.
abdication of our calling otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Aaron, what questions kind of arose out of the text for you?
Well, I did kind of go on that first verse talking about in the spring of the year when kings go out to war. Just, we don't really know the situation of why David stayed home. And I think your observation of, how he used that time was ill-used, obviously. But also, what kept him from being there? We've already addressed the fact that this was... the sword was very much a part of the kingdom, and that was just by necessity and just to keep the kingdom together. So there's that. But for whatever reason, David wasn't where kings normally are at this time. So what happens, what we don't see is God sanctioning that. And so that's, I guess, where my question would arise is, are we in a place, are we putting ourselves in a place that God's not said, this is where you should be? Just a couple chapters ago, we said God gave him rest, but we're not seeing that here. So I think this is a different situation. So what happens when we are outside of God's anointing and appointing to say, this is what tends to happen when you step outside of where you should be?
Yes, he was using his power to further his own interest instead of using it to lead his nation at that time.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for being with us today and help us think through these things. We'd love your comments below. Help us answer these questions of power and how we use it well. So thank you.